She thought it was just another rainy Tuesday, walking home after a double shift. She was wrong. When a terrified 7-year-old boy crashed into her on a rain-slicked Chicago street, begging for help, Gianna didn't hesitate. She stood between a trembling child and a circle of armed men. She didn't do it for money. She didn't do it for fame. She did it because it was right. But Gianna made a mistake. She thought she was saving a random kid from kidnappers. She didn't realize she was holding the only son of Salvatore Santoro, the city's most ruthless Mafia don. And tonight, that act of courage is about to ignite a war. Watch closely. This is the story of how a waitress became the queen of the underworld. The rain hammered Chicago's South Side like a punishment from God himself, turning the streets into rivers of gray and black. It was 2:47 a.m., and Gianna Torres was bone tired. She pushed through the back door of Miller's 24-hour diner, her second-hand coat pulled tight against the downpour, her server apron still tied around her waist. She'd been too exhausted to take it off. The rain soaked through immediately, cold water running down her neck, but she barely noticed. She just finished a brutal double shift, 16 hours on her feet, serving coffee to drunks and truckers who tipped in quarters. Her sneakers squelched against the wet pavement as she walked past the dumpsters toward the bus stop 3 blocks away. The streetlights reflected off the puddles like broken mirrors. At 26, Gianna felt twice her age. Her lower back ached, her feet throbbed, and her tips for the night, $47 weren't enough to cover both groceries and the overdue electric bill. She fumbled in her pocket for her phone to check the bus schedule, rain streaming down her face when she heard it. Running footsteps, fast, desperate, splashing through puddles. Gianna looked up just as a small figure barreled around the corner of the diner. The boy couldn't have been more than 7 years old, and he was running like death itself was chasing him. His expensive navy blazer, tailored, sophisticated, completely wrong for a child running alone at 3 a.m., was soaked and mud-splattered. His dress shoes, leather and pristine, were sliding on the wet pavement. He saw Gianna and changed direction, sprinting straight for her. "Please!" he gasped, his voice breaking with terror. He crashed into her legs, nearly knocking her backward against the brick wall of the diner. His small hands fisted in her apron, and when he looked up at her, Gianna saw absolute primal fear in his dark eyes. "Please, they're coming. Please hide me." Gianna's maternal instincts, usually reserved for her younger sister back in Ohio, exploded like a flare in her chest. She dropped into a crouch, ignoring the cold water soaking her knees. "Who's coming, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice low and urgent. "Where are your parents?" "The bad men," he whimpered, tears mixed with rain on his face. "They hurt my driver. They're going to hurt me. Please don't let them." Tires screeched. Gianna's head snapped up. 3 black SUVs came skidding around the corner, headlights cutting through the rain like blades. They formed a semicircle, trapping them against the diner wall. Doors flew open. Men emerged, 5, 6, 7 of them, wearing dark clothing. Balaclavas pulled over their faces, hands reaching inside their coats. Gianna didn't think. She didn't calculate. She moved on pure instinct. She grabbed the boy and shoved him behind her, using her body as a shield. She spread her arms wide, making herself as big as possible, planting her feet on the slick pavement like she had any right to stand against armed men. "Stay behind me," she hissed to the child. "Don't move." The masked men began to close in, forming a tightening circle. Their boots splashed through puddles. Rain pounded against their shoulders. They moved with the coordination of predators, cutting off every escape route. "Step aside, lady," one of them called out, his voice muffled behind the mask. "This doesn't concern you. Give us the kid, and you walk away." Gianna's heart hammered against her ribs so hard, she thought it might break through. Her hands shook. Her knees threatened to buckle. But she looked at the boy's terrified face pressed against her back, and something fierce and primal rose in her throat. No. The simple word hung in the rain-soaked air. The masked men exchanged glances. One of them laughed, a cold, rattling sound. Wrong answer. They stepped closer. Gianna had no weapon, no training, no plan. She was a waitress in a soaked uniform holding back armed kidnappers with nothing but defiance and a mother's rage she didn't even understand. Her hands balled into fists. The boy whimpered behind her. The circle tightened. This was how she was going to die. And then another vehicle roared around the corner. A massive black armored SUV, sleek and lethal, moving too fast for the wet streets. It hydroplaned to a stop directly in front of Gianna and the boy, the back door already swinging open, before the wheels had fully stopped. A man emerged. He was tall, over 6 feet, bald, with dark tattoos visible on his neck and behind his ears. He wore an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Gianna made in a year. Despite the rain, despite the chaos, he moved with the calm, predatory grace of an apex predator who'd walked into his own territory. His eyes, dark, stormy, and absolutely devoid of mercy, locked onto the masked men. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the rain, "you have made a grave mistake." 8 more men emerged from the SUV behind him, pulling submachine guns from under their coats with practiced ease. They fanned out, weapons raised, surrounding the kidnappers who'd been surrounding Gianna and the boy. The situation flipped in 3 seconds. The man in the charcoal suit walked forward, rain streaming off his shoulders, his eyes never leaving the masked men. He moved past Gianna, close enough that she smelled sandalwood and gunpowder, and stopped directly in the space between her and the kidnappers. "Nico," he said without turning around. His voice was different now, softer, but still commanding. "Come here, son." Gianna felt the boy release her apron. She wanted to grab him back, to keep him behind her, but the child stepped around her legs and ran to the man in the suit. "Papa!" Nico sobbed, crashing into the man's legs. The man, this dangerous, terrifying man, reached down with one hand and lifted the boy effortlessly, holding him against his chest. For just a second, the mask slipped. The cold warlord vanished, replaced by a father clutching his terrified child. Then his eyes rose to the masked men, and the predator returned. "You touched what is mine," he said quietly. The words were soft, but they carried the promise of violence. "You put your hands on my son." One of the masked men started to speak. "Boss, we didn't." The man in the suit raised his free hand. Just a small gesture, a command. His men opened fire. The sound was deafening. 3-round bursts from professional weapons with silencers that turned gunshots into rapid coughs. The masked men collapsed one by one, crumpling into the rain-soaked street. Gianna screamed. She staggered backward against the diner wall, her hand flying to her mouth. She'd just watched men die, executed, right in front of her. The man in the suit turned to face her. Nico's face was buried in his father's shoulder, his small hands covering his ears. The man's eyes, those dark, merciless eyes, studied Gianna with the intensity of someone assessing a tactical problem. "What's your name?" he asked. His voice was calm. Too calm for someone standing in a street full of corpses. Gianna couldn't speak. Her throat had closed. She could only shake her head. The man stepped closer. Rain poured between them. He towered over her, still holding his son with one arm. "I asked you a question," he said, his voice dropping lower. Not threatening, stating a fact. "What is your name?" "Gianna," she finally choked out. "Gianna Torres." He nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. Then he looked her up and down. taking in her cheap coat, her diner apron, her soaked sneakers, the exhaustion written into every line of her face. "Gianna Torres," he repeated, "you just saved the heir to the Santoro crime family. That makes you responsible for him now, and it makes me responsible for you." He turned and began walking back toward his SUV, still carrying Nico. "Wait," Gianna stammered. I was just—" The man stopped. He looked back over his shoulder, rain streaming down his face. "The men who sent these dogs will know they failed. They will come looking for the woman who hid my son. If I leave you here, you will be dead by sunrise." His eyes held hers. "So you have two choices, Gianna Torres. You come with me now, under my protection, or you stay here and die." He didn't wait for her answer. He walked to the SUV and placed Nico gently in the back seat. Then he looked at her one more time. Gianna looked at the bodies in the street. She looked at the rain. She looked at this terrifying man who'd just slaughtered 7 men without breaking a sweat. And she walked forward. She had no phone, no purse, no plan, just her soaked uniform and the sinking realization that her life as she knew it had just ended. She climbed into the SUV. The man slid in beside her, pulling the door shut. The interior smelled of leather and danger. "My name," he said, as the SUV pulled away from the scene of carnage, "is Salvatore Santoro. And as of tonight, Gianna Torres, you belong to me." The rain hammered against the roof as they drove into the darkness, leaving her old life and 7 dead men behind in the flooded streets of Chicago. The SUV's leather seats were too soft, too expensive, too wrong for someone who just watched 7 men die in the rain. Gianna pressed herself against the door, as far from Salvatore Santoro as the confined space would allow. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Nico sat between them, his small body wrapped in a blanket one of Salvatore's men had produced from somewhere. The boy had finally stopped crying, but his breathing was still ragged, punctuated by small hiccups. He kept one hand fisted in his father's suit jacket. "Where are you taking me?" Gianna's voice came out smaller than she intended. Salvatore didn't look at her. He was typing something on his phone, his jaw tight, his movements precise, despite the adrenaline that must still be coursing through him. "Somewhere safe. My estate, north of the city. I need to call my sister. She'll worry if I don't check in by morning." "Your phone is gone." He finally looked up, his dark eyes pinning her in place. "As of 3 minutes ago, your apartment is being cleaned. Your phone, your laptop, any security footage from the street, all of it is being erased. Gianna Torres, the waitress, no longer exists." The words hit her like a physical blow. "You can't just erase me. I have a life. I have bills. I have rent due next week. You have a target on your back." His voice dropped, dangerous and flat. "The 7 men tonight worked for my brother, Dante. He orchestrated Nico's kidnapping to take my throne. Their leader was supposed to be Rocco Amato, Dante's best executioner. But Rocco wasn't there tonight, just disposable street thugs." Gianna's stomach lurched. "Why does that matter?" "Because Rocco is still out there, still loyal to Dante. And by now, they know their men failed. They know someone helped my son escape. They know what you look like." He leaned forward slightly. "If I let you go back to your apartment, you'll be dead before dawn. They'll make it look like a robbery. Your sister in Ohio will get a phone call from the Chicago PD, and she'll never know why you really died." Gianna's throat closed. "I didn't ask for any of this." "No." Something that might have been respect flickered across his face. "You just stood in front of a child and refused to move." "Papa," Nico whispered, his voice hoarse, "is Gianna going to stay with us?" Salvatore's expression softened when he looked at his son. He smoothed the boy's wet hair back from his forehead. Yes, she's going to stay with us. She's going to keep you safe. His eyes met Gianna's. Welcome to the Santoro family, Gianna Torres. I hope you survive it. The 40-minute drive passed in suffocating silence. Chicago's south side faded into wealthy northern suburbs Gianna had only seen in magazines. When they finally pulled through massive iron gates flanked by armed guards, she realized she'd stopped breathing. The estate was a fortress. Dark stone and bulletproof glass rose 3 stories against the storm, illuminated by harsh floodlights. More guards materialized from shadows, hands resting on invisible weapons. A woman in severe gray uniform waited at the entrance. 50s, hair pulled so tight it stretched her face, eyes that swept over Gianna's diner uniform, with barely concealed disdain. Signora Bianchi, Salvatore said, stepping out with Nico. Prepare the blue guest suite. Get her dry clothes. Inside, black marble reflected crystal chandeliers. A grand staircase swept upward. Everything with sharp edges and cold surfaces, and money that whispered rather than shouted. Salvatore handed Nico to the housekeeper. Take him to his room. When they were alone, rain hammering the windows, Gianna found her voice. Am I a prisoner? Salvatore studied her for a long moment. You are a guest under extreme protection. But for now, Miss Torres, the answer is yes. Do not try to leave the grounds. The dogs are trained to hunt. He walked toward double oak doors. You saved my son's life. That means you are now part of this family, whether you want to be or not. Tomorrow we discuss your future, what's left of it. The doors closed. Gianna stood alone in the marble foyer, still wearing her soaked diner uniform. She'd saved a child and lost herself. Gianna woke to sunlight that felt wrong. Too soft, too golden, too expensive. The blue guest suite was larger than her entire studio apartment. Silk wallpaper the color of storm clouds, vaulted ceiling with crown molding, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking gardens so manicured they looked painted. On a velvet chair, Signora Bianchi had left clothes. Silk pants, cashmere sweater, both in shades of cream. They fit perfectly. Someone had measured her while she slept, or guessed with unsettling accuracy. Gianna felt like an imposter playing dress-up. She moved through the mansion cautiously, following the sound of rhythmic thumping. The hallways were quiet, except for the distant murmur of guards speaking into radios. In the living room, she found Nico. The boy sat on the floor in pajamas, bouncing a tennis ball against the wall. Thump, thump, thump. Mechanical, empty. His eyes focused on nothing. A tray of untouched pancakes and fruit sat on the coffee table. The syrup had started to congeal. Salvatore stood by the window, coffee cup in hand, still wearing yesterday's blood-stained shirt. He looked exhausted, helpless, a king stripped of his power. Nico, you have to eat. His voice was strained with barely controlled frustration. The ball continued its rhythm. Thump, thump. The boy didn't even blink. Nico! Salvatore's voice sharpened into the command that made grown men obey without question. Look at me. The ball hit the wall again, and again, as if his father hadn't spoken at all. Salvatore's hand tightened on the coffee cup until his knuckles went white. He looked like a man watching his son drown and unable to reach him. Then he saw Gianna on the stairs, and his expression hardened into something unreadable. He hasn't eaten. He hasn't spoken a single word since we got home. His voice was flat, defeated. The doctor says it's shock, trauma. Gianna walked past him without asking permission. She sat down on the floor next to Nico, not touching him, not taking the ball, just sitting there in her borrowed cashmere sweater, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "When I was your age," she said softly, staring at the wall where the ball hit, "I used to hide under the porch when I was scared. It smelled like wet dirt and spiders, but it was safe." Nico's hand paused mid-throw, just for a second, but he was listening. "The problem with hiding, though, is that you get really hungry, and spiders don't make very good pancakes." She reached out, took a strawberry from the untouched plate, and bit into it. Sweet. Much better than spiders. She held the plate out within his reach, not forcing it, just offering. Nico turned his head slowly. He looked at her with those dark eyes that were too old for 7, and something flickered behind them. Recognition. The lady from the street. The one who stood in front of the guns. He reached out with a small, trembling hand, took a piece of melon, put it in his mouth and chewed slowly. Then he took a pancake. From the window, Salvatore's coffee cup lowered. He'd spent an hour trying to command his son back to life, and this waitress in borrowed clothes had broken through in 2 minutes. He walked over and did something Gianna suspected he never did. He sat on the floor. The Don of Chicago, still wearing his blood-stained shirt from the night before, lowered himself onto the rug beside them. "Thank you." The words sounded like they cost him something to say. "He's not a soldier, Mr. Santoro." Gianna kept her voice gentle but firm. "You can't order him to be okay." His jaw tightened. "I know what he is. He is my son." "Then stop looming over him like a tower." She met his gaze without flinching. "Sit with him. Be here. That's what he needs." For a bizarre moment, the three of them sat there on the expensive rug. A crime boss, a waitress, an heir, sharing pancakes in the morning light like they were a normal family. "I need to talk to you," Salvatore said finally, his voice low enough that Nico wouldn't hear. "About last night. My security team found something when they searched your apartment. You have a passport. You applied for a visa to Italy 3 years ago. Why?" Gianna's chest tightened. "I studied art history in college, before my mother got sick and I had to drop out. I wanted to see Florence. It was just a stupid dream." "Papa is from Italy," Nico whispered suddenly. His first real words. "Sicily." Salvatore's expression softened when he looked at his son. "Yes, we have family there." He turned back to Gianna. "Dante is making his moves. Right now, he's regrouping, but he'll be hunting for you. He needs to eliminate anyone who witnessed what happened last night. So here's my proposition." He leaned forward slightly, and the casual father disappeared. The Don returned. "You stay here. You look after Nico. You keep him calm, keep him safe, help him heal from this. In exchange, I pay off your sister's student loans, your mother's medical debts, all of it. When Dante is dealt with, I give you a new identity, new documents, and enough money to go to Florence, or anywhere else you want." Gianna's throat went dry. It was everything she'd been drowning in debt over, everything that kept her working double shifts and counting quarters. "And if I say no, you can't say no." His voice wasn't cruel, just stating a fact. "Outside these gates, you're a dead woman walking. Dante's people are already looking for you." She looked at Nico, who was watching her with those hopeful eyes, still holding half a pancake. "Fine." The word came out barely above a whisper. "I'll do it. For Nico." "Good." Something that might have been relief crossed Salvatore's face. "Welcome to the family, Gianna." The intercom on the wall crackled to life, and a guard's voice filled the room with tension. "Don Santoro, we have a situation at the main gate. It's your brother. Dante is here. He says he wants to check on his nephew." The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Salvatore's eyes went from warm to ice in the space of a heartbeat. He stood smoothly, brushing imaginary dust from his pants. "Nico, I need you to go to your room with Signora Bianchi. Play your video games. Put on the noise-canceling headphones. The good ones. Nico's eyes went wide. Is Uncle Dante bad? Go. Salvatore's voice was gentle but absolute. Now. The boy scrambled to his feet and ran for the stairs, just as Signora Bianchi appeared to collect him. When they were alone, Salvatore reached into his waistband and pulled out a small, sleek pistol. He held it out to Gianna. Her stomach lurched. I don't like guns. Take it anyway. Hide it in your waistband at the small of your back. Stand 3 feet behind me and to my left. Do not speak unless spoken to directly. You are the new nanny. You arrived yesterday from Ohio. You are invisible. Do you understand? Her hands shook as she took the cold metal weapon. Why is he here? Salvatore's jaw tightened. He's here to see if Nico is alive. And he's here to see if I know what he did. He started walking toward the foyer, then paused and looked back at her. And Gianna, try not to look like you witnessed 7 murders last night. She followed him toward the massive front doors, the gun of foreign weight against her spine, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. The Viper was coming to visit, and she had to stand there and pretend she was nobody. The double doors of the Santoro estate swung open, and Dante stepped inside like he owned the place. If Salvatore was a fortress of cold stone, Dante was a viper draped in silk. Younger by 5 years, with sharper features and a smile that stretched too wide across his face, a smile that held no warmth, only calculation. He wore a camel-colored coat that probably cost more than Gianna used to make in 6 months, and carried a wrapped gift box under one arm. The doting uncle, playing his part to perfection. Salvatore stood in the center of the foyer, hands clasped behind his back. He didn't move forward to embrace his brother, didn't offer a handshake or a drink, just occupied the space with that dangerous silent authority that made the air feel heavy. Gianna stood 3 feet behind him and to his left, hands folded demurely in front of her, feeling the hard shape of the pistol pressed against her spine. She kept her eyes downcast, playing invisible. Brother, Dante's voice boomed off the marble. I heard about the security breach last night. I came as soon as I could. Is Nico safe? Nico is fine. Salvatore's voice was flat as steel. He is resting. Dante's eyes scanned the room, the guards positioned in shadows, the bulletproof windows, the fresh scuff marks on the floor from last night's chaos. Then his gaze landed on Gianna. He paused. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, curiosity. She couldn't tell. I don't recognize this one. His tone sharpened. New staff. You didn't tell me Signora Bianchi was hiring. Salvatore shifted slightly, subtly blocking his brother's view. This is Gianna, Nico's new governess. The previous one didn't work out. Dante moved like water around his brother's wall, circling toward Gianna, the way a shark circles blood in the water. Every instinct in her body screamed to run. Gianna! He drew out the syllables, tasting her name. Pretty name for a pretty thing. Look at me. Gianna slowly raised her head, met his eyes. They were pale blue, almost colorless, and utterly soulless. They searched her face with clinical precision, looking for fear, looking for recognition, looking for the woman who'd stood in the rain-soaked street between his hired guns and his nephew. Have we met? His head tilted slightly. Your face. It reminds me of someone. Her throat tried to close. I have a common face, sir. I just arrived from Ohio yesterday. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Then Dante laughed, a sharp barking sound that made her flinch. Ohio. Cornfields and cows. No wonder you came to the city. He leaned closer, and she could smell expensive cologne mixed with something rotten underneath. Well, Gianna from Ohio. Make sure you take good care of my nephew. Accidents seem to happen so frequently these days. The threat was thin and sharp as a razor. "I will, sir." Dante turned back to Salvatore, the smile still plastered on his face. "I brought Nico a new game console. I'll leave it here. Listen, Dom. We need to talk business. The shipment at the docks." "Not today." Salvatore's voice cut through like a blade. "Today is for family, and you are leaving." Dante's smile faltered. For just a second, the mask slipped, and pure hatred flashed in those pale eyes. "You're pushing me away, Dom. People will start to think you don't trust your own blood." Salvatore took one step forward, and despite being the younger brother, Dante actually stepped back. "I trust my blood," Salvatore said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "I just don't trust yours." Dante's jaw clenched so hard, Gianna could hear his teeth grinding. He adjusted his coat with sharp, angry movements, his eyes flashing with barely suppressed rage. "Careful, brother." The smile was gone now. The throne is a lonely place to die. He turned on his heel and walked out. The heavy door slammed behind him with a sound like a gunshot. Gianna's breath came out like a sob. Her knees buckled, and suddenly Salvatore's hand was on her elbow, the only thing keeping her upright. "You did well," he murmured, his face close to hers. "He suspects, but he doesn't know. That uncertainty will buy us time. He's going to come back." Her voice shook. "I saw it in his eyes. He's not done." Salvatore's grip tightened on her arm. His eyes had gone dark again, calculating and cold. "Neither am I." 3 weeks passed like a dream Gianna kept waiting to wake from. The estate, which had felt like a marble tomb that first night, became something else, something that almost felt like home. Flour dusted the kitchen counters where she taught Nico to make chocolate chip cookies, the boys' laughter filling spaces that hadn't heard joy in years. Signora Bianchi walked in just as the mixing bowl exploded, coating all 3 of them in white powder. The housekeeper's stern face cracked into something that might have been a smile. In the library, Gianna read Harry Potter aloud, while Nico sprawled on the Persian rug, his small face rapt with attention. He asked questions again, about her sister in Ohio, about the diner, and whether she missed the smell of coffee, about whether she'd stay forever. She never knew how to answer that last one. Salvatore became a ghost in his own house, disappearing into his study for hours, while his war against Dante played out on the streets. But at night, he found her, joined them for dinner instead of eating alone in his office, stood in the library doorway watching her read, something profound and aching written across his face when he thought she wasn't looking. Their hands brushed once in the hallway. The touch lasted half a second, but the electricity of it stayed with her for hours. He started leaving books on her nightstand, art books about Florence, the pages marked at his favorite pieces. She started leaving coffee outside his study door when she heard him working past midnight, always gone by the time he opened it. The guards began nodding to her with respect. Signora Bianchi no longer looked at her with disdain, but something protective, maternal almost. Nico started calling her Gia. One afternoon, he asked her point blank, "When you marry Papa, will you be my mama?" Gianna's heart stopped. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Nico just smiled like the answer was obvious and went back to his coloring book. Meanwhile, the news spoke of gang violence escalating on the South Side. Warehouses burning. Bodies found in the Chicago River. Salvatore was dismantling his brother's empire piece by piece, and everyone in the house could feel the pressure building. The storm was coming. One night, Salvatore came home with blood on his white shirt. He wouldn't talk about it, just headed upstairs. Gianna followed him to his bathroom, where he was trying to clean a knife wound across his ribs with one hand. Let me. She took the antiseptic from him. He watched her hands as she worked, steady and gentle despite the blood. The intimacy of the moment, her fingers on his bare skin, his breath catching when she pressed too hard, made the air feel thick. Why are you still here, Gianna? His voice was rough. You could have run, slipped out a dozen times when no one was watching. Where would I run to? She didn't look up from the wound. You said it yourself. I'm a dead woman outside these walls. Is that the only reason? Her hands stilled. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they weren't saying. All the charged glances, the accidental touches, the way her heart raced when he walked into a room. She finished bandaging him without answering, but they both knew the truth. She wasn't staying because she had to. She was staying because leaving him, leaving them, would hurt worse than any bullet Dante could fire. Somewhere in 3 weeks of flower fights and bedtime stories, of blood and books and coffee left outside doors, they'd become a family. And that made what was coming so much more dangerous. The storm came on a Tuesday night, just like the first one. Gianna stood in the kitchen at 3 a.m, kettle heating on the stove, watching rain hammer against the windows. She couldn't sleep. Hadn't been able to for days. The house felt too quiet, like the silence before lightning strikes. Can't sleep? She spun around. Salvatore leaned against the island, his suit jacket and tie discarded somewhere. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the dark tattoo that curved across his collarbone. He looked exhausted, human, devastatingly handsome in his vulnerability. Just thinking, she said. About what? About how long this can last? She turned back to the window. We're living in a bubble, Salvatore. But bubbles pop. He moved closer. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell sandalwood and gunpowder, and something uniquely him. I won't let it pop. His voice was low, certain. I've dismantled half of Dante's crew in the last week. Frozen his assets. I'm choking him out. Soon he'll be nothing. He's your brother. She looked up at him. Does that make it harder? He searched her eyes for a long moment. Then his hand rose, hovering near her face, before finally tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers brushed her cheek, rough skin against soft. He tried to kill my son. He ceased to be my brother the moment he gave that order. His gaze dropped to her lips. But you. Me. The word came out barely above a whisper. You are the only real thing in this house. His voice was raw now, stripped of all his careful control. You walked into hell for a child you didn't know. You stand up to me when my own captains are afraid to speak. You've brought light into a tomb, Gianna. He leaned in. Her heart hammered so hard, she thought he must hear it. She didn't pull away. His lips brushed hers, tentative, testing, asking permission. When she didn't recoil, he groaned low in his throat and kissed her properly. Not gentle, possessive, desperate, claiming. He tasted like whiskey and suppressed need, and 3 weeks of wanting. Gianna's arms wrapped around his neck, pulling him closer, melting into the hard lines of his body. For one perfect moment, the war didn't exist. There was only rain and heat, and this man who made her feel more alive than she'd ever been. Boom. Not thunder. An explosion. The kitchen window shattered inward. Salvatore tackled her to the floor, his body covering hers, as glass rained down like deadly confetti. The breath punched from her lungs. Alarms began to wail, a high-pitched shriek that meant perimeter breach. Stay down! Salvatore rolled off her, already moving, pulling a gun from a holster attached to the underside of the kitchen table. Nico! Gianna scrambled to her feet despite the glass cutting her palms. Salvatore! Nico's upstairs! Gunfire erupted in the foyer. Automatic weapons, shouting, the sound of men dying. Go! He shoved her toward the service stairs. Get to him. Take him to the panic room in my closet. I'll hold them off. She ran. Behind her, she heard Salvatore's voice roaring orders to his men, the metallic click of weapons being readied. The war had come home, and it was going to burn everything down. Gianna ran through darkness. The house had become a war zone. Gunfire echoing from below, men shouting, glass shattering. The lights flickered once, twice, then died completely. Only the muzzle flashes from the foyer below and emergency red strip lighting showed her the way. She took the stairs 2 at a time, her lungs burning. Glass from the kitchen still embedded in her palms. Nico's door flew open under her hand. The boy sat up in bed, clutching his teddy bear, eyes impossibly wide with terror. Gianna! It's okay, baby, I'm here. She forced her voice steady. Remember the spy game? We have to get to the safe base, right now. She scooped him up. Didn't care that he was too big, that her arms screamed in protest. Adrenaline made her strong enough to carry the world. She ran into the hallway, and a shadow detached from the wall. A man in tactical gear, rifle raised, red armband on his sleeve. Dante's forces, not one of Salvatore's men. Put the kid down. Gianna froze. The pistol Salvatore had given her was still in her nightstand. Useless. She set Nico down slowly, pushing him behind her legs. Run when I move. Papa's room. Go. No! Nico whimpered. Well, well. The voice came from the stairs. Dante emerged from the shadows like a demon, silver pistol in hand. His hair was disheveled, his camel coat splattered with blood. He looked manic, victorious. The nanny in the air. He circled them slowly. I knew you. The waitress. My men were incompetent that first night, but I'm not. I should have killed you 3 weeks ago. Salvatore will kill you for this. Dante laughed high and unhinged. Salvatore is busy bleeding out on his kitchen floor. My men have him pinned. The great Don is dying as we speak. Ice shot through Gianna's veins. Salvatore, bleeding, dying. Dante raised the gun, pointing it directly at Nico's head. Goodbye, nephew. The throne is mine now. No, Gianna didn't think. She lunged for the heavy antique vase on the console table and hurled it with everything she had. It smashed into the guard's face. He stumbled backward, rifle firing wildly into the ceiling. Dante flinched, turned his head. That split second was all she had. Gianna tackled him. They crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs. She wasn't a fighter, had never thrown a punch in her life. But she fought like a feral animal protecting her young, clawed at his eyes, bit his hand when he tried to cover her mouth, kicked and screamed. Dante roared and backhanded her with the pistol. Her vision exploded in white light. She rolled away, dazed, warm blood pouring into her eye from the gash on her temple. Dante stood, panting, wiping blood from the scratches she'd left on his cheek. He raised the gun again, this time aiming at her chest. You annoying little bitch. His finger tightened on the trigger. Gianna stared down the barrel of Dante's gun. Blood ran into her eye. Her head throbbed where he'd pistol whipped her. Nico stood frozen, whimpering. The guard with the bleeding face raised his rifle, aiming it at both of them. Then he reached up and pulled off his balaclava. A scar cut through his left eyebrow. His eyes were dead and cold as fish. Rocco Amato, Dante's best executioner, the one who should have been on the street that first night. Rocco, kill them both, Dante ordered, his gun still trained on Gianna. Rocco's finger moved to the trigger. Gianna closed her eyes. Bang! The shot was deafening, but wrong. The direction was wrong. She opened her eyes. Dante stood perfectly still, a look of profound confusion on his face. He looked down at his chest, where a small red blossom was spreading across his expensive shirt. "Oh," he whispered. He crumpled to the floor. At the top of the stairs stood Nico, 7 years old, holding the guard's fallen rifle, nearly as big as he was. The recoil had knocked him back against the wall. Smoke curled from the barrel. He'd pulled the trigger. Rocco spun, raising his weapon toward the boy. "No!" Gianna screamed. Nico's small hands shook violently as he raised the rifle again. His face was streaked with tears, but he pulled the trigger. The second shot hit Rocco in the throat. The executioner dropped, gurgling, blood pooling beneath him. Silence crashed down on the hallway like a physical weight. Gianna scrambled across the floor on her hands and knees. She grabbed the rifle from Nico's trembling hands and kicked it away. Then she wrapped him in her arms, burying his face against her chest so he wouldn't have to see the bodies, the blood, what he'd been forced to become. "I got the bad man," Nico whispered, his voice hollow with shock. "You saved us, baby." She was sobbing now, rocking him. "You saved us." Footsteps echoed down the hall. Salvatore appeared, limping badly, his white shirt soaked with blood on the left side. He held a gun, but when he saw them, saw Dante's body, Rocco's body, his son and Gianna huddled on the floor. The weapon clattered from his hand. He fell to his knees. The Don of Chicago, the most powerful man in the city, crawled the last few feet to them. He wrapped his good arm around both of them and buried his face in Gianna's neck and wept. "I thought I lost you," he choked out. "I thought I lost you both." They held each other in a hallway full of corpses, a broken family that had somehow survived. Below, police sirens wailed in the distance. The war was over. But the cost would live in a 7-year-old boy's nightmares forever. Dawn broke over the Santoro estate like a wound slowly closing. The windows were shattered, walls riddled with bullet holes, marble floors stained with blood that would never fully wash away. But the storm had passed. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Salvatore's lawyers were already there, intercepting them at the gates. Money would change hands. Evidence would disappear. Security footage would be lost. This was the world they lived in, where power could erase even the worst nights. Gianna sat on the back of an ambulance, a blanket draped over her shoulders, watching a paramedic stitch the gash on her temple. Body bags were wheeled past. Dante, Rocco, others she didn't know. The end of a dark chapter, written in blood. Salvatore walked out of the house, moving stiffly. He'd refused the hospital. A private doctor had patched the bullet graze on his ribs. He walked straight to her, and when their eyes met, she saw something break open in his face. "Nico's asleep. The sedative is working." She nodded, her throat tight. "He shot a man, Salvatore. He's 7 years old. He shouldn't have had to do that. He protected his family. In our world, that's the only law that matters." He reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and desperate. "But I'm done with this war. Dante is dead. His faction will scatter. The threat is gone." He pulled a folded check from his pocket and placed it in her palm. "You're free. The contract is fulfilled. You saved my son twice. $5 million. You can go to Florence. You can go anywhere. You never have to look over your shoulder again." Gianna stared at the check. $5 million. Freedom. Florence. Everything she'd ever dreamed of. She looked at the broken house, thought of Nico sleeping upstairs, who would wake needing comfort from his nightmares. Thought of Salvatore, the lonely king who'd finally found his queen. Thought of the fire in her own blood when she'd tackled Dante. She couldn't go back to waiting tables, couldn't go back to being invisible. She took the check and slowly, deliberately, tore it in half. Then in half again, let the pieces flutter to the ground like snow. Salvatore stared at the pieces, then at her, his eyes widening. Gianna, why? I don't want to go to Florence alone. Her voice was steady now. And I don't want to leave Nico. He needs me. Salvatore stepped closer, invading her space, that dangerous intensity returning. And me? Do I need you? You tell me, boss. A small smile touched her lips, despite everything. He didn't answer with words. He cupped her face in his hands like she was made of precious, fragile glass, and kissed her. A promise, an oath, forever. You are not the nanny anymore, he whispered against her lips. You are the lady of this house. You are the only person who ever brought me to my knees. Just don't make me cook. She laughed through her tears. His laugh rumbled deep in his chest. Deal. 1 year later, the Santoro estate gardens bloomed with white roses and Italian jasmine. The rain that had brought Gianna Torres into this world had given way to perfect September sunshine. She stood at the altar in a dress that cost more than the diner where she'd once counted quarters. Ivory silk that caught the light, a train that spilled across the grass like water. But it wasn't the dress that made people stare. It was the way she carried herself, radiant, powerful, certain of exactly where she belonged. Salvatore stood beside her in a black tuxedo, looking at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. His eyes held the same desperate devotion they'd held that night in the kitchen, right before the window shattered. But now, there was no fear, only certainty. Nico stood as best man, 9 years old now, sharp in his own tuxedo, holding the rings with steady hands. The shadow of that terrible night had faded, replaced by the confidence of a boy who knew he was loved fiercely and unconditionally. He grinned when his father kissed his new mother, and the crowd erupted in applause. The guests were a map of Chicago's true power structure. Mobsters in expensive suits, politicians who owed favors, judges who looked the other way, the city's elite. They all knew the story. The waitress who'd stood in front of guns for a child she didn't know. The woman who'd torn up $5 million and chosen love over freedom. The woman in white was not to be trifled with. As Salvatore and Gianna kissed, the gathered crowd rose to their feet. She was no longer the invisible girl counting tips at 3 a.m. She was the Queen of Chicago, standing beside her king. Salvatore leaned in, whispering something in her ear that made her laugh. That real, unguarded laugh that he'd fallen in love with over pancakes on the floor. She turned and smiled, not at the guests, but as if looking beyond them to everyone who would hear this story. Because she knew the truth now, the things she'd learned in rain and blood and broken glass. Sometimes the worst nights bring the greatest transformations. Sometimes protecting a stranger changes everything. Sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most beautiful destinations. The rain had brought her a storm, but it had also brought her a kingdom, and she would rule it with the same fierce love that had made her step between a child and death on a rain-soaked Chicago street. The waitress was gone. The queen had arrived. And that is how a single act of bravery changed a life forever. Gianna didn't just save a boy. She saved a family and found a love worth fighting for. It proves that sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most beautiful destinations. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It helps us create more dramatic stories for you. Did you expect Nico to be the one to save them? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new episode. We have a thriller coming next week that will blow your mind. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next story.